Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our attendees across the globe. My name is Houry Guedelekian, and I welcome you to another Armenian International Women's Association virtual event where we share with you insight into current issues that are of concern and relative to our lives. This year, AWA celebrates 30 years, and we are proud to say that our mission to connect and elevate Armenian women globally remains as effective then as it does today. Our focus is on three strategic areas: education, health and wellness, research and publications. And to ensure the accurate portrayal of Armenian women and to promote their equal role in communities and audiences throughout the diaspora and Armenia, AWA has representation at the United Nations. Founding members of AWA attended the United Nations, I think it was the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing, China in 1995. And their goal was to connect, to listen, to learn, and then to lead. Since then, AWA has been a member of the UN Economic and Social Council, the UN Department of Public Information, and has, as I mentioned before, representation at the United Nations NGO Commission on the Status of Women, where we host a panel and discuss as part of the NGO CSW. And this year, our panel will be held on March 20th. And you'll hear more about it as we proceed with the program and with the rest of our year's program. But this year, AWA's board representation at the UN is chaired by Veronica Moroyan, who has put together a team of representatives to moderate the virtual Zoom sessions. And today's event, Women at the UN, Driving Change Globally, with our guest Houry Guedelekian, is the first of a 5-part series leading up to the March 20 panel, ending with a follow-up session. And moderating today's event is one of AWA's UN representatives, Tina Glandian, attorney at Geragos & Geragos law firm in New York. Now, I welcome you both, Houry and Tina. And before I pass the virtual podium over to Tina, I want to remind our attendees that there will be a Q&A opportunity toward the end of the session. And we encourage you to type your questions in the Q&A as opposed to the chat for easier reference. However, we also encourage chat, and feel free to chat within one another and also send us messages if you would like to. And before we actually start, I have prepared a poll that was asked for me to send out, saying, so if I'm going to push this poll out, and it is, how familiar are you with the workings of the United Nations? It's just one answer, and if you could please, as you are listening, I'm assuming you can all see this poll, and if you can, there we go, everybody's answering, and we'll keep it going for another few seconds, and so I can end the poll in a bit. Meanwhile, if there's somebody raised her hand, Karina Partsumyan raised her hand, let's see. I'm assuming we can all be heard. All right, I'm going to end the poll now so that we won't waste much more time. And we have somewhat at 60%. Here we go. Somewhat 60%. And the next was very at 23%, and not at all was 17%. Let me share the results and see if I can get everybody to see the results. All right, so I'm going to stop the sharing, and now, without further delay, I will pass the virtual podium to our lovely UN rep, Tina Glandian. The virtual podium is yours.
Thank you, Silva, and hello, everyone. My name is Tina Glandian. On behalf of all of the UN representatives of the Armenian International Women's Association, also known as AWA, I welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Women at the United Nations, Driving Change Globally. As Sylvia just mentioned, this is the first in a series of webinars leading up to the NGO CSW Parallel Panel on March 20th, the title of which is Are Institutions Ready for Women's Success? The 2-hour panel discussion will take a look at how far Armenian women have come in obtaining gender equality and what challenges remain. The main objective of this discussion is to elevate the role of Armenian women in decision-making and in domestic and international relations. We are very proud of the diverse group of outstanding and accomplished Armenian women, including at the United Nations, in entrepreneurship, in government, in leadership, and in humanitarian work. Throughout these hosted webinars, these extraordinary women will share their experiences, challenges, strategies for success, and recommendations for the future. And with that said, I'm delighted to welcome today's guest speaker, Ms. Houry Guedelekian, the chairwoman of the UN NGO CSW in New York, who's here to provide the coming attractions of our NGO CSW event. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today, Houry.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Good. Can you explain for those who don't know what the CSW is?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first, let me just say thank you truly for having me here. And thank you, Iowa, and its leadership and its membership for really spearheading something that I've always wanted to see us do as Armenian women. Just gathering and empowering each other, learning from each other, and moving our cause, the gender equality, forward. So bravo for all of you. And thank you all for joining us. And I just quickly scanned through the names and I see one gentleman, which I'm very proud of. If there's any other guys, please. I mean, we need men and boys on the table with us while we have these discussions. Sorry, Tina, I'll jump right in and answer
sorry.
questions. Yes. So, and I'm glad that at least 60% are aware of UN and what happens there. So I don't want to go into too many details, but NGO CSW is the non-government organization of the Committee of the Status of Women, and we are mandated to bring women's and girls' voices to the UN at least once a year. We work throughout the year, but our major event is bringing voices to the Commission on the Status of Women. And I try to say these words carefully because that's the big difference, right? We are the Committee on the Status of Women. We are the NGO and the civil society. And at the UN, there's the Commission on the Status of Women, which is representative of the governments, what we call member states. So we've been doing this for over 45 years. I think we're coming up to our 50th anniversary. I've been involved for 10 years. And it was just love at first sight for me when I just I was told by Armenian Relief Society to go represent them. They are also another ECOSOC accredited organization that I was involved with way back. And I'm always grateful that they gave me that opportunity because I was at a time in my life where I was switching careers, and I walked into the 54th Commission on the Status of Women in 2011, I believe, yes. And it was Michelle Bachelet was giving a speech, president of Chile, and then became the executive director of UN Women. And it was the launch of UN Women. And everything she said resonated with me. So I was like, okay, this is it. We're going, we're going to find out what we can do and how we can help. So that's what Commission on the Status of Women does, is bring civil society organizations together globally to the UN in New York City once a year. Years ago, it started like end of February, but now it's always in the middle of March, basically. That's when it happens for 2 weeks.
Okay, and other than that 2-week session, how often does the commission meet and deal with these issues?
The commission actually only meets leading up to the, like right now there's the Commission of Social Development happening at UN. So even though Commission on the Status of Women is preparing, there's a board, a bureau, what they call the Bureau of Member States. The minute the Social Development Commission ends, the Commission on the Status of Women starts meeting. There's a zero draft that the Secretary General creates. And actually, this is probably perhaps the best time to say that every year at the Commission on the Status of Women, there's a different theme that we address, right? And this year's theme is women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life. as well as the elimination of violence for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. But that first part of it, effective participation and decision-making in public life, is something that I would love to keep coming back to as Armenian women as well, knowing what's happening in our country, you know, with transition to democracy and the war that happened. There's just so much we can dive into there. But so, and another part that's really important to note here. So 10 years ago, when I first walked into CSW 64, by coincidence, Armenian Mission was the chair of CSW. And it was, oh gosh, I have to remember his name. I'll think of it in a minute. And I was just stunned that Armenians were, I mean, I didn't know anything about United Nations. Let's just be clear here, right? I just knew I was interested in advocacy and wanting to change my career. So of course, I started trying to figure out a way to get to know the mission and who these people were. And then of course, 10 years later now, last year, the chair of Commission on Status of Women Bureau is the Armenian Mission again. And this is really important to note because it just shows, as a very small mission, a small country, you know, you can imagine compared to the other 193 countries and major superpowers. I'm very impressed and proud of our team at the mission to put their neck on the line, right? Because these are volunteer positions most of the time. You know, missions decide what is important to them, and that's what they volunteer to be on committees. And to be the chair within 10 years is actually remarkable. I just feel bad that COVID hit us and that we were not able to shine as much as we were going to shine. And we're doing the best we can with that. But yeah, kudos to the Armenian Mission.
And you mentioned a little bit about the theme of the CSW for this year. How does that come about? Who selects the theme of the CSW each year?
You're awesome. You're asking all the right questions. Thank you. So for a second, I want to go back to Beijing Platform for Action. What Silva mentioned about Beijing, the 4th Women's World Conference, that is actually a really important milestone for feminists and gender equality. And it's really important to highlight that. So last year was going to be the biggest year ever at CSW because we were celebrating the 25th anniversary of Beijing Platform for Action. Now, I always like to clarify, Beijing, the only reason it's called Beijing is because the meeting happened in Beijing. We can't give China any credit. On the contrary, China volunteered to host, but tried everything in their power to push civil society away, to make it difficult for women to gather there, but women gathered anyway. And we came up with the strongest recommendations to this day, actually. So most of us, what we're doing, we keep revisiting that platform of action that 189 countries at the time, we are now 193 countries, had agreed to provide to achieve gender equality, right? The problem was that we were on such a high, I think, and again, when I say we, I was not even close to this world 25 years ago, but a slew of amazing women, including Iowa, ARS, and so many other, obviously, international feminists were there and achieved the unimaginable. So then what happened, because we loved the 12 critical points of the Beijing Platform for Action, every year we kind of pick one of those agreements that we had to deliver, and we look at it and see if the world has come any closer to achieving it. So that's what happens at the UN. It's like, you know, rural women, education. Now, of course, we've added climate because 25 years ago, we didn't have a climate issue. LGBTQI issues were not as strong in the Beijing Platform for Action. Girls were not as strong, just a little. So we bring those topics back and supplement it with what is also necessary in these days. So the topics are definitely all based on the Beijing Platform for Action.
Thank you. So let's talk about a little bit of where we are today. So the year is 2021. Here, at least in the US, the first female vice president was just elected to office. In your opinion, where are we today with issues like gender equality and the empowerment of women? Both, and I'm asking both here in the US and how that compares to where we are globally and particularly in Armenia.
Absolutely. So, and this is a line we keep saying over and over again. We've come a long way, you know, and we always go back to Beijing because that was a decisive and transformative moment for feminists. We've come a long way since 1995, and even before, if you go like with the voting rights and everything. But we are definitely not nowhere near. And here's one quick example I can give you. Again, I can talk for hours about this, so I want to try to keep it short so that we can have some interactions. And I can give you one big example. Even when women, like this year's topic is going to be fascinating because of this, even as we can say Kamala Harris, which is crazy to think that it should be the first time in the United States that we have a vice president who's a woman and woman of color. Thank God. But even if you do get elected, even if you do hold office, then you are bullied and pushed aside. And, you know, and I don't know if anybody follows AOC. She's like a perfect example, right? This young woman who became a congresswoman from New York. I mean, the stuff that's been said about her, the difficulty that she has to exercise her right as an elected official leader is crazy. And I see the same thing. And if we can kind of put our heads together, and I think this is a group of women who could imagine how we can actually also influence that more women do become involved in Armenia itself, and take the chance to run for offices, and not just in parliament, like put like low, you know, associates or lower ranks, but push ourselves to really bring our voices to those diplomatic spaces where we can make a difference. I think that's when we're going to see a major shift, right? I mean, you can see the same thing in corporate worlds and media. I know so many of you are in those worlds, or even in law as yourself. You know, when you see women rise up in the ranks, that's when you see culture changing in the organization. Now, having said that, I will also quickly admit that it's always the right woman that you want there, right? Because we can also see, even in this country, on the far right, for example, these women leaders who you're like, what the heck are you thinking? Like, you know, educated women who really take some certain stance where you're like, what? Anyway, so I just needed to also acknowledge that just because we're women doesn't mean that we're 100% perfect either. I hope I didn't veer off too much from your question.
No, I mean, I agree with your point. I mean, not all women are created equal, like everything else. But how about the role of government in all this? So in your opinion, what can and should the government do to advance the goals of the CSW?
So here's the beauty of this, and it took me a while to learn it, right? I think the beauty of what UN is that it brings different players to really engage, influence, and inspire each other to make change. And the truth is that government alone can't do it, but it is really important to push for policy, and that's when the government comes in. The policy must be there, but then without women and girls and civil society, or like, you know, what I say bottom up, if we don't know what our rights are and what to actually push for in diplomacy and to implement it, I mean, to help implement it and hold our governments accountable, then it's just some agreement on a piece of paper filed away, right? So I think that's the part that's really important. We need to know our rights. For example, if women know what governments have already agreed on, like the 12 critical points of the Beijing Platform for Action, then we can come together and figure out a way how to advocate. And that's what we do during CSW. What we're doing is we're advocating on behalf of civil society by going to governments. For example, there's a zero draft that was already issued, right? And we have access to it. We just got access to it yesterday, actually. And hopefully later on, we'll hear from somebody who's on our advocacy and research committee that takes that zero draft, as they've been consulting on what we want to see changed, Then we look at the zero draft on what governments are going to be discussing, and we'll say, yes, and please this, right? So you can make recommendations on what you want to see on the agreed conclusion at the end of the 2 weeks. But if we don't tell governments what to do, how are they going to know what is needed on the ground? So we need both of them.
Understood. Going back for a second to the CSW itself, I just want our audience to have a better understanding as to what the makeup is of the CSW. So who's present, as part of this commission? Who's being represented?
On UN side, there's a bureau of 5 representatives. So every year, and they stay for 2 years mostly, unless they resign. So for every 2 years, they choose 5 bureau members, and it's 5 because you need 1 from each region. So we're from the Eastern Europe, there's Africa, there's Middle East, there's Asia, there's North America. I don't know if I repeated, but the 5. So, and then there's about, I would say, 65 members from all the missions that make up this group. Now, if you're not on the membership of CSW, it doesn't mean that you don't attend. So all 193 countries are usually involved during these meetings. And what's interesting is that the 2 weeks of Commission on the Status of Women is actually the second most attended and busy times at the UN after the General Assembly. Wow. And we always use that as our discussion point to say women are the ones who take action, right? Like people come from all over the world to really participate and have their voices heard during the Commission on Status of Women, which is great, but it also creates a lot of pushback. So even though, for example, this bureau right now, the 5 bureau members are not very progressive members, except for Armenia. We have Korea, we have Australia, who you would think is progressive, think twice. And also what this means is that each election changes. For example, last year, US was on the enemy side for us, right? They were in the far right pushing against gender equality, literally, in so many ways.
US was.
Absolutely. Taking our reproductive rights away, taking LGBTQI rights away, human rights away. They literally, for the last 4 years, stripped away a lot of our rights on the global platform. And it was a disaster for all of us. So when I judge countries, it's always like fluid, right? It depends on who's leading that country. Right now, Armenia is still progressive, thank God, and I hope it stays that way. We have to make sure it stays that way. Democratic, progressive government, and that's what we want.
Now, as far as in terms of gender equality and women's empowerment, how far do you believe is too far? Is there a point where this is too far? And I'm going to use an example. I think everyone is familiar with the recent Me Too movement, which empowered women to publicize allegations of sexual abuse and which urged the public to, quote unquote, believe women. Do you think that's a double-edged sword? How do you feel about, for instance, that movement?
I love this conversation, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because it also personalizes in some ways what we're talking about. Because a lot of times when I'm talking about CSW, it's just so global, right? It's just so out there. But all of the issues that we talk about at CSW is connected to us individually, personally, if you just think about where that connection is. And the Me Too movement, actually, we at the United Nations are almost jealous of that movement on how it just, caught on, and it became like viral, as we call it, right? Because we've been trying to get that kind of attention with the work that we do at the United Nations for gender equality for years. Now, everything that happens, there's always like the pluses and minuses, right? It's wonderful that women have learned through the Me Too explosion on boundary issues and also things that we have all and it's true, 1 out of 3 women has experienced violations and violence against themselves. And that is absolutely true. So like when you think about it, we have 55, 60 people here. Imagine at least 20 of us can come up with a story of at least, if not more, can say that we've been violated. I personally have experienced it myself. And it's really important to acknowledge that, but it's also important to see how it's affecting the male gender as well, right? This is not just a woman's issue. I mean, I always say the violator is just as hurt and needs help as the violated. So we really have to be sensitive about this topic and be careful in judgments. You know, we always say, somebody the other day said, if anybody knows the Ansari and the Weinstein issues, right? Harvey Weinstein, pig, I'm sorry, you know, I do talk very casually about this. He needs to be in jail. He's done enough harm. I don't care what creative outlets he's had. But then there's the Ansari, this comedian who went out on a date and crossed the line and, you know, lost his career because the woman spoke up. So do you really consider that if it was even a mistake on her part, that we should stop talking about the Me Too movement? No, I say no. She needed to speak her truth and he needed to learn through that truth, even if it wasn't as bad as he says that it was, or if she says that it was. So I think it's a conversation that we really need to have openly, especially within the Armenian community. I know we still carry around this word amot. I don't know if we have others, non-Armenians, you know, this shame that we are raised with, and this, like, you know, be careful not to be too loud and not to speak up too much. We have to really, for the next generation, give them the ability to speak up more and to really know their boundaries and their rights.
And speaking of the next generation, what is some advice as to other women who are interested in getting involved, who would like to participate? You're clearly very, very passionate about the subject. And so what advice would you give to other women who would like to get involved?
Thank you. Yes, everybody, please come to NGO CSW. I don't make and this is what's so interesting. So first of all, as I mentioned before, this is a new career for me. Most of my life, I was a wife, a mother, and a businesswoman. And I had a business with my husband for 35 years that I loved and enjoyed and don't regret anything about my past. But I had reached a point where I really needed to make a change for my personal reasons. And I didn't even have a degree, because in my business world, you didn't need a degree to really be successful and achieve. So I was really lost in what I wanted to do. So I say that because I want to encourage people who think, oh, you know, it's too late for me, or I never studied this. I knew nothing. I mean, I lived and worked in New York City on 57th Street for 40 years, never been to UN until that opportunity in 2011. So, and there's always different ways of starting. And also, you don't have to really do gender equality. There are lots of other committees as well, but we are the largest committee, and I encourage gender equality because there's all the topics that you are passionate about: climate change, education, widows, I mean, whatever, it is connected to gender equality. So you can come into the gender equality world and then choose to be an expert in a specific topic. So yes, I definitely encourage, no matter what you're doing, and I say this, most of us are actually volunteers. I don't get paid as chair of NGO CSW. That's a committee work. I sometimes get paid through consultancy. One of the things I learned, like I said, I didn't have the education or the background, but I had skills. I had the passion and I had the drive to want to learn. And that's all you need. And you can just, I mean, we didn't even have Googling back 10 years ago. Now I Google and learn everything. But yeah, I definitely encourage people to just start attending meetings. That's the best thing. So even though we have those 2 weeks, which is crazy scheduling that working 24/7 right now. After that, we have monthly meetings. I also definitely encourage the youth. So we are expanding and bringing in more youth voices, because a lot of the volunteers, I'm actually one of the youngest volunteers. Most people retire and start this work. And it's wonderful because we bring a lot of experience and knowledge and the time that we have, but we really need youth voices. And I'm so excited that Ewa actually has a rock star, and I think she's here today, who joined NGO CSW and our youth leaders, young professionals. And she's doing amazing. Honestly, just because I'm Armenian and she's Armenian, don't give me any credit for this girl. She came in there, and woman, I should say, sorry. I'm just so proud of what she's doing with our advocacy and research work. And she's just, teaching herself. So I encourage everybody to just come to our meetings, and then you'll see who is making sense and where do I fit in, and what are my skills that I can provide, and you'll figure it out.
Perfect. And
I hope we can share the links later, right? So that people...
Yes, absolutely. I see some questions. I know that there are people who are interested in getting involved, and we will provide some links that everybody can access to learn more and to participate. I know one question that somebody just asked in the chat is how somebody could attend the 2 weeks of the meeting. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Let me just at least share this quick link. So there's so much information on our website, but let me just start with that right now. If you go to the NGO CSW website, you will see that information. So there's an information there about NGO CSW 65 virtual platform. And I know we didn't even talk a lot about the challenges that we've been facing for the last 2 years. Once we stopped meeting in person last year, it was literally 2 weeks before we were going to launch, and 20,000 people were coming globally that we were hosting. So we've moved everything to virtual. So our virtual platform is very easy to sign up for. It's free, and you become an advocate. It's called the Advocate. So by signing up, you can already call yourself an advocate. I actually saw somebody on LinkedIn the other day, their title was their name and then NGO CSW Advocate. And I'm like, wow. I mean, it's wonderful. And then it's free to attend. We have 650 panel discussions scheduled over the 2 weeks. One of them, obviously, I'm so proud to say, is Iowa. We do reject some events because sometimes we're not aligned in our values, but we try to welcome even oppositional. Like we have certain organizations who don't believe in abortion, and I have to give them the space to talk about it, right? So it's not about what I believe in, it's what women need to discuss. Yeah, so you can sign up and join us anytime. It's global, it's around the clock.
Thank you. I think you touched a little bit upon how things have moved to a virtual platform now. Can you tell us just in general your opinion as far as how the global pandemic has impacted the work of the CSW?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is definitely unfortunate because there's something missing. Like even today, imagine if we were all together, right? It would have been much better, more personable, and there's certain vibes that you only get when you're in a room together. And especially in diplomacy and advocacy, it's really important, because we actually advocate while walking through the halls of UN. We see certain ambassador or somebody who works at a mission, and we run up to them and we go, did you get my recommendation? Please, you have to make sure that's really in the final document. On the other hand, it gave us a tremendous opportunity to bring in voices that would not normally be heard. So this virtual platform, fortunately or unfortunately, it sounds like we're stuck with it. So even if we go back to meeting in person next year, the reaction so far, and we'll see, I mean, the whole thing could collapse in March and then you won't find me again. I'll go hide somewhere under the rocks, and this will be the last time you see Houry Guedelekian. But let's say it works out and we are successful with the 2 weeks. We're really we have to keep these virtual platforms afloat so that globally, people who can't afford to come to New York, their voices are still heard. So it's been both, and I say the same thing with women's issues, right? We've all heard that COVID hit women a lot harder than anyone else. Moms, you know, both in health-wise or economically and even inequality, and violence against women spiked because women who were in volatile situations, it became worse because they were stuck with their abusers. So there's a lot of bad news with COVID. And at the same time, I can also say that we have to look at the silver lining and see how COVID opened up all of our eyes. I remember the first thing I said when we were canceling last year, I said, if the Beijing platform, I'm getting goosebumps. I mean, even thinking about it, I get so crazed. If the Beijing Platform for Action was actually implemented, we would not even have COVID because we would have universal health care. We would have equality. The poverty line would not be as bad as it is. And access to healthcare would not be as bad as it is. So I'm not saying that, you know, viruses won't happen, but it wouldn't be as bad as it is right now if we were really taking care of this world. I mean, people on the West Coast can actually vouch for this, and India did too. Within 2-3 weeks after COVID hit and we were all in lockdown, the world, you know, climate was better. You know, fogs disappeared. I mean, we have to learn from this lesson, this tiny particle that we can't even see and fight, the lesson that it's teaching us. If we don't learn from this, then we're doomed. Well, I'm not a doom kind of a person, but yeah.
I see that, and I love that. Is there, in your opinion, Houry, a certain milestone that we're looking forward to on behalf of women as kind of the next big achievement we'd like to obtain?
Oh, I wish there was just one single thing I can point out. I guess, you know, I always come back to violence against women, because when we say violence against women, it's not just the domestic violence, which we usually connect it to. And if we can get rid of domestic violence, I swear, you know, we know that's like an impossibility, right? Because it's not, it's connected to so many different variables. But violence against women, I think it should be something that we all keep close to our hearts, because it affects, it's also economic justice. It's violence against women. If you're not giving women equal pay, that's violence, you know? I mean, and it took me a long time to really understand and learn this. So I say this knowing that some people might roll their eyes and go, wait a minute. And it's true. What we do with climate is violence against women, because it affects women in rural areas, you know, when they can't, you know, use their land because of dry, and I'm talking globally, right? But I would like to say, I want to focus on Armenia because we are majority Armenians here. I want to come back, and if it's like full circle to kind of close with this, is that I would love for this community to really think about how we can bring more women leadership in Armenia. Please. That would be like when I blow my birthday candles, I'm going to wish for that. When anybody asks me for a wish, that's what I'm wishing for. And it's not because I don't trust or like male leadership. It's just that we know, and even during COVID, we learned this, right? You know, look at New Zealand, look at all the countries, even Germany, you know, you might not agree with the leadership, but countries with female leadership did so much better. So why wouldn't we want better for our country? I'm sorry, I'll stop here.
No, thank you. And you said you're wishing for it. I think you're doing more than wishing. I think you're actively contributing. So thank you for that. And I think this is maybe a good time. I've seen some really intelligent questions come in from the audience. And so I think it's a good time to turn over and take a few questions from the audience. So I'm going to look in the chat and read you. And if anyone else has a question they'd like to submit for Houry, please do so. One that I saw come in, Anush asked, how can the UN generally and the CSW specifically serve as a nudge for Armenia and Armenians in diaspora to help themselves and understand we would have more leverage internationally with the greater presence of women in its public representatives and figures?
Who did you say asked this? This is absolutely, it's exactly what we're talking about.
Yes.
Anu, thank you for your question. And it's really exactly what I said. It's, and I can tell you this, I'm not here to promote the mission because there are times I'm frustrated with our mission as well, but I can tell you how proud I am of them because they are such a small mission and they do so much. And I have personally visited over 50 different countries' missions, right? We call them missions, but I always like to slip in the country. So we've met with all the largest mission to the smallest mission, and I'm speaking objectively when I say Armenian mission is somebody we have to be proud of, and they know, Anush, they know what you're saying is true. It's just so much that we can do through UN. Like for them to be the chair of CSW within 10 years, that alone should show you how much they care about this topic. But it also needs to translate to our country, right? We need to, that's why I'm so excited. I was doing these series of conversations because I know you have a lot of women from Armenia who are going to speak. Make sure you attend all of these events and hold them, hold their feet to the fire and say, like, thank them for being in the positions that they are. And let's find out from them how we can help as diaspora to influence more Armenians to run for offices or to take leadership roles.
Thank you, Houry. We have another question. This one is on domestic violence. Anahid has noted that domestic violence is on the rise worldwide during the pandemic. How is NGO CSW going to address this issue at the upcoming Status of Women conference? And how will the Armenian mission, as the chair of the NGO CSW, try to strengthen the try to strengthen the pathetically weak domestic violence law in Armenia?
Yes. Well, thankfully, in the last 2 years with the Pashinyan leadership, there was some changes and movement happening in Armenia. And we hope that they keep going in that direction, right? Because right now with the war, unfortunately, all of our progressive ways kind of came to a halt. I don't think we're going backwards yet. I mean, I was afraid there for a while that we might go, and again, this is not an endorsement for Pashinyan. I don't care who becomes the prime minister. Hopefully it will be a woman, actually. But let's say whoever it is, that we keep going in the direction that we were going, which was more human rights based and putting on laws on the books that will help that. But I think we at CSW, the one thing I can tell you is that, and you can see from the listing of our parallel events, COVID is, how can I say, a co-star to the priority theme this year. We can't help but integrate. And just like I said earlier about what COVID did, both the negative and the positive, it is very important that we weave COVID into our conversations in both ways to see how we can advance in some ways that we don't turn back again, right? And that's the most frustrating part about my job, if you want to call it that, is over the last 10 years, seeing all of us go 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And sometimes actually, like in the last 4 years, we had gone 1 step forward and he pushed us 2 step backs. So it's like this frustration of like, how are we ever going to just keep advancing and not get pushbacks?
Thank you for that, and I'm very sorry to interfere with this, but it's a topic that is very close to AWA's heart as well. And just to inform the attendees that AWA does actually advocate for the education of women to understand what violence is, just like Houry explained. And it isn't just the physical, but it is all the different other abuses that could happen. And we do actually work with a women's support center headed by Maro Matosian, actually, who we've been working with them for the past 10 years. Ever since they established it, we were one of their major donors. And so I just want to let the audience know they're concerned, and that we are, as an organization, as much as the UN is working for it as an organization, we too as AWA are working to change legislature. And like Houry said, things have changed, but definitely not to the extent and to the speed that we would like it, just like the way it did not work in at the 4th conference in Beijing, when they made all those promises. They thought by today we should be, you know, leveled equal with the gender and all the other things that go with it, but it didn't work out that way. But please, let's go ahead. There are so many other questions, but I did want to clarify that AWA is doing everything it can to work towards that equality and to advocate for against domestic violence.
Thank you, Silva. And this next question, I guess, could be for either of you. We have Seema asking, how can we get support from Iowa for educating women about violence and gender equality in other places around the world? And she was asking specifically about India, but I think this applies to everywhere in the world.
I mean, I know Silva should answer for Iowa, but I can just say to Seema, and thank you for being here, Seema. We know each other from the NGO CSW world, that Iowa is concentrating on Armenia and Armenian diaspora, right? That's
correct at this point, yes. Yeah. Yes, but the UN is the one that has opened it up to all the other countries. And I have to let our attendees know that Seema Rajput, I believe it is actually tuning in from India. She's from India. So we have an audience here. And not to take away from the questions, but I want to let you know we've got people from Toronto, Washington, New York, Philadelphia, let's see, Moscow, and of course, other parts of the United States, and of course, India. So I just want to let you know that that is our audience right now today. There we go. Next, I think there's quite a few other questions here. Oh, you know, one question that came up, may I and I can't remember who it was because it's between chat and Q&A, we get lost sometimes. How effective do you think that Samantha Powers was to move our agenda as women forward?
I think it was very helpful. I mean, the Obama era was an amazing time at the UN. I was lucky to have been there because we had access to the mission, and there, I don't agree with everything that Samantha did. And also even Obama administration. I think their policy with Syria was deplorable. You know, using drones was deplorable. You know, again, I'm not blindly following just because they're progressive and democratic, but for gender equality, I can say that, oh God, did we miss them? I mean, right now, I'm just like so happy that we finally can go back to some of it. For example, the gag rule. I don't know if anybody has heard of the gag rule. The Trump administration put that in. And here's the thing that's really strange. Trump didn't even give a damn about these things. He didn't care, but he did it because he wanted the votes to do what he wanted to do, right? And the gag rule was to defund any organization that was going to help with reproductive rights, and not just abortion, like any reproductive rights, and including with like peace and security, because you know rape is used as a weapon of war, as we know. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened too much with our own war with Azerbaijan and Armenia, but around the world, rape is used that way. But the gag rule also even denied women who were raped during war to get services. I mean, who does that? You know, I mean, this is where I can't like stop doing what I'm doing, because when you hear stuff like this, you're like, what kind of a world are we living in where you can't give access, help that's needed, someone who was raped because they happen to be on the enemy side? Now it's changed. So Biden changed the gag rule already. So we're going to keep funding for women's rights. Yeah.
Thank you. On that funding issue, we had another question from Karina, which is, what is your take on the diaspora funding machine into Armenia? Is the diaspora helping or making things worse? And specifically, where can financial donations be placed?
Yeah, I like this question too, even though obviously I'm not an expert at this, but I do donate and I am involved with different organizations. I always say it really, I think it's best to help smaller organizations. I'm always for knowing who's on the board and how are they using their money. This is really important, right? But I have to say, in the last few years, I know that there's rumors that this government also used up the Armenia funding in the wrong way, but I can't really speak for it. I don't know, but I can't really in good conscience say do not donate because the money is not going in the right place. Find a way to donate to help no matter what, like the Women's Resource Center, Women's Support Center. There's a lot of good reputable places where, and Quiddix, by the way. I mean, I love this young new organization, and I know you guys have an event with them that Ani's going to moderate in April. I can't wait. I mean, that means I will be alive in April and that we succeeded with the CSW. They're amazing. Please follow Houry and donate to them. And Iowa, of course.
And I think Ani, I do think I saw Ani in the chat earlier. I don't know if logistically if this is possible, but Ani, if you're able to join in and say a few words, this is Anika Petya, and she's one of my fellow UN representatives for Iowa, and she's heavily involved in the youth programs, and I think she could say a few words as far as getting other youth involved. Hi, Ani.
I have allowed her to talk. I believe she can be heard. Go ahead, Ani.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Oh, well, thank you, Tina, and thank you, Houry, for the shout out. Sorry, I have to be off camera. I was feeling under the weather a little bit. But super excited to be on this call, and it's always great to hear Houry's passion. It just fuels me every time to listen Houry speak, because I'm also really passionate about women's rights. So a quick background of mine, I have my master's in international development. I did my master's at NYU and specifically focused on women's rights and women in development. So although I went into social entrepreneurship and not specifically into fighting and advocating for women's rights, I was always involved in that world. So I started actually working with NGO CSW, I think it was 3 years ago. One of my friends, Nicole Vartanian, who was working with AWA back then, told me that there is a young people's group that works at NGO CSW, youth leaders and young professionals. And we started organizing events, and I kept in touch. And as I became one of AWA's UN representatives, I wanted always to go back and see what other young people are doing. So we started to plan events with YLYPs, events leading up to the NGO, to the Commission of Status of Women, and also during the Commission of the Status of Women, we have events. And at one of the calls, one of my YLYP coworkers told me that there is this research and advocacy group that is doing research specifically on certain issues that women face, and they're going to present demands and actions to the Commission on the Status of Women. So they were looking specifically for young women to have youth perspectives on how those issues impact young women specifically and uniquely. So it's been great. I've been doing research and adding my input, also organizing other young women's work. And we also created a survey to gather young people's perspectives at scale. So it's been an amazing opportunity. Really thankful that I have been a part of this. And I can add my email in the chat if there are any other young women who are interested to learn how to get involved and what is the space that allows young women to participate and what are the avenues. I'll be happy to connect and help out.
Thank you so much, Ani.
Yes, please get in touch with Ani and learn from her. I have been so impressed because we are not actually on the same committee together because I can only be in so many committees. But her committee is one of the most important ones because they're the ones, like she said, collecting the information to feed into the zero draft, which is the actual advocacy that we do, right? So yeah, thank you for your work. I'm so pleased.
Of course, thank you
so much, Ani.
Did
Okay.
you want to go with another question?
Yes, I think we have time for another 1 or 2 questions. We have another question from Anush that's asking to address the question of intersectionality as it applies to the processes and possibilities of meaningful change towards empowerment and inclusion of women in Armenia.
Wow, that's a good one. I mean, everything I just said is kind of fits into that, like the whole intersectionality of the different, you know, age, gender, orientation, you know, but my brain actually is getting distracted because one of the things I'm really proud that we're doing this year, and if anybody's interested in this work, please join our platform. Intersectionality is actually based on, what's her name? On racism, right? Like it started out as a response to racism, and we're addressing anti-racism across the board on our platform, and there's a specific partnership space that that I'm proud to have helped navigate, because even though we don't identify as Black or brown, you know, we identify with the issues of minorities and centuries of pain that we carry, right? So I think it's really important we support each other. And I'm sorry, Anush, I kind of got distracted. I think it's really important, you know, somebody was asking about nationality insecurities, and I'm really trying my best to answer while I'm also paying attention here so we don't miss anybody. So I'm sorry if I just randomly answering. The trick with, and this is why gender equality and Commission on the Status of Women is so popular, right? Because so much can work through gender equality. So it's important to have, for example, the organization I represent right now is Unchained at Last, which is a US-based, very small organization. There's only 3 people, and that works for me because I have no duties there except to represent them, and they're trying to stop early marriage in the United States. So I'm supposedly only advocating for that at UN, right? But you can't really just do that either. It's very important to even if let's say I was advocating to end early marriage and change policies and come up with rules, you have to see the underlying effects of that, right? Why are girls so disposable? Why are girls married off? Most of the time in the US, it's because they're raped and they get pregnant and parents are ashamed and they rather marry them off, or they think there's no future for a girl anyway, so you might as well marry them off. And you have to see where that's coming from: poverty, lack of education, all of that. You have to look at all the different aspects of it. I hope that was a good enough answer for you, Anush.
And I think we have time for one final question. So it's an anonymous participant who's asking, they're commenting that women are especially vulnerable in armed conflicts. Maral Najarian is one of the women who is still being held captive in Azerbaijan. How can IWA or NGO CSW raise this question at the UN and push for pressure on Azerbaijan to return Armenian POWs and captives? How can we help?
So we have actually reached out to human rights organizations, and we're partners with certain organizations who have helped us sign on to Resolution 1325, which is a peace and security agreement that, you know, I don't want to get into the details. Like we're supposed to have all the protections for not having POWs, especially women. And it's unfortunate. I mean, don't get me started on how frustrating it is when you are in the midst of this, when you're devoting so much of your time and energy to bring equality to the world, and you really can't get your rights. heard is very frustrating. But what I can tell you is that we've tried our best, and I've been in touch with the Women's Support Center and Women's Resource Center, who are trying to get us more information about them. I haven't heard back from them yet, so it's still in progress. We do the best we can to connect with international human rights organizations and defend our rights, you know. But needless to say, the politics of what's going on with Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey right now is just heartbreaking, to say the least. It really made me want to quit almost, you know. That's all I'm going to say. Yeah, it's been heartbreaking, but you know, and then you wake up one day and somebody gives you some hope or love and affection, and you're like, oh, maybe I can go on a little bit longer, and you just try again. We simply can't give up, right? It's just been heartbreaking to watch what happened to us in the last few months.
Could not agree more with you, Houry. But unfortunately, this is the end of the time we have today. I want to thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us your wisdom, experience, and insight on the CSW. And again, I would urge anyone who's interested in getting involved to visit the links that we've provided in the chat boxes and to participate and support.
Yes, and it's really been a very motivational experience to be here. And I think those who, I mean, if there ever was a time for Armenia and the diaspora to see how women's organizations such as AWA and an international organization like the UN are committed to promoting social progress, better living standards, human rights, it would be now. Yeah. With our common focus on education and skills development, job creation, economic growth, health, psychological well-being, cultural enhancement, advocacy, peace building. The vision that we share is just the beginning of what we can all do together if we work together, united. So I want to really personally thank Houry Guedelekian. She's probably had the most challenging job as chair of the CSW and adapting to the overnight changes that have occurred over the past year, given the pandemic. And she's brought on and prepared for this year's over maybe 650, as you mentioned, virtual panels in the US CSW in a matter of 2 weeks. We all, like she encouraged us all, you can all be advocates and go on there and listen to any of the panels that are there. Thank you to
I just add one more thing in 30 seconds. I'm sorry. I just want to thank you both for this opportunity, because I don't like to, I hope it didn't sound like too much of a brag. I just want people to feel open and welcoming to do this work if they want to. And I want to give a shout out. I know there was a lot of comments about Tina, I know, is here, and Mary, who was somebody I met originally, represented Iowa. I think it's really important to talk about where Iowa came from and all the wonderful women who has worked there. But I implore you all not to get stuck in the past. Please bring in the youth, bring in the new faces and voices. We will never forget the women whose shoulders we are standing on. I say the same thing with the Armenian Relief Society, the same thing with Armenian International Women's Association, and the same thing at NGO CSW. It's not just an Armenian issue. It's an international issue where sometimes we get stuck with what happened in the past. Please move on, bring in the youth, and let's support each other, because at the end, we all want the same thing. We want better world for women and girls who will make sure that the world is better. Thank you so much.
I really thank you for that, because that is truly the way a good leader should lead, letting the others come in and follow their paths and actually not get stuck in the past, like you said. Just a quick reference to Anika Petya, who's going to be doing one of our AWA and the UN sessions, and we will be ending with the youth and Kuyriks. And we've already had them on our show once before with their different leaderships, and this is going to be marvelous. It'll be in April. You will get the rest of the schedule. And I appreciate both of you for taking and starting our series with such powerful messages that reflect women and Armenian women and all women globally. And thank you, our UN rep, Tina, who moderated this session to provide the insight into the United Nations and prepare us for the next 4 events at Iowa at the United Nations. Last but not least, I need to thank our listeners across the globe. We appreciate your devoting part of your weekend to us and to AWA and to our programs. You know, you inspire us to learn more, to do more, to become more, and then to lead more. So please look out for future AWA events and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you're not yet a member, we encourage you to go to our website, awainternational.org, and join the global network of women who share our values. And as always, we repeat our values. They are integrity, respect, inclusivity, service, and relevance. So stay well, stay safe, stay informed, and stay relevant. Until next time, thank you